Since losing her husband, Mary Rose's whole world has centered around one person, her 10-year-old son, Tommy. But one morning, Tommy is taken by the ruthless gang of Isaac Grady, men whose name alone strikes fear across the county. They believe fear and despair will force her to find the money, even if it means selling her soul. The sheriff shrugs it off, and the neighbors, too scared to even speak Grady's name, turn their backs. Mary is left alone, with nothing but grief and fear. So she goes to the only one left who might help, a former tracker named Jed Collins. Jed can't walk away. 6 years ago, he buried his wife and daughter, and he knows too well the sound of silence when a house is truly empty. The trail leads him into a wild canyon, the kind of place even animals avoid. In Grady's lair, Jed will have to do what he's avoided for years, pick up a gun and go back into the fight. Welcome to Weathered Stories. Today, I'll tell you a story of courage, sacrifice, and how one man found a reason to live again. Will Jed make it through the outlaw's den and bring the boy home alive? What wins in the end, fear and cruelty, or love and determination? If you're ready to hear how one man stood up to death itself, hit that like button and let's begin. Mary Rose woke up earlier than usual. The house was still dark, with only a sliver of pale light slipping through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, the air was cool and dry, the kind of morning you get at the start of summer. She sat up in bed, rubbing her stiff fingers. Every morning, her joints ached like old door hinges. By now, Tommy would usually be back with the water. He always insisted, "I got it, Ma." He was 10, but in his mind, already a man. Always the first one up, swinging the bucket over his shoulder, heading to the creek half a mile down the road. She stepped out onto the porch, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. The bucket was gone. Not by the house. Not by the shed. She called out, "Tommy." No answer. 10 more minutes passed. She circled the house, looked down the road. Everything was still, the kind of quiet you only hear at dawn. Wind rustled the grass. A crow caught somewhere far off. Something twisted tight in her chest. She grabbed her shawl, pulled on her boots, and started walking the road toward the nearest neighbor, the Caldwell place. Mr. Caldwell opened the door, an older widower with kind eyes. "Morning, Mary. Everything all right?" "Tommy, he didn't come back from the creek. I thought maybe you saw him?" Caldwell furrowed his brow, thinking for a moment. "You know." "Yeah, I think I did. Saw him heading down the slope toward the water. Early, real early, before sunup. He was alone." But he narrowed his eyes, remembering 10 minutes later, a rider came through. Didn't recognize him. Big black horse with a white patch on its neck. "Grady's men?" Mary whispered, already knowing the answer. He nodded. Could have been. Him, or one of his boys. Mary thanked him, but something inside her had already gone still. On the way home, she didn't walk, she ran. She checked the barn, the chicken coop, the shed, all the places Tommy used to hide when he played. She called his name, louder each time, until it turned into a whisper. Silence. She ran down the path toward the creek. There, by the old elm, in the dust, hoof prints, deep and clear. And right beside them, tiny barefoot prints. They walked side by side for a while, then vanished. Only the larger hoof prints kept going, up toward the hills. Mary dropped to her knees. Her hands shook. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears would come later. First came the silence, the ringing in her ears, and a single, searing emotion, fear. But in that fear, something else began to take shape, something firm and unshakable. Tommy was alive. She knew it. And she wasn't going to wait around. Her son wasn't a prize. He wasn't a ghost to be forgotten. No one had the right to take him. She slowly stood, staring toward the path that disappeared into the hills. Beyond them lived men the whole county feared. But she had no choice now. Sheriff Judson was sitting in his chair out on the porch, a cup of strong coffee in hand, eyes tired and far away. His dusty hat was pulled low, and his boots were propped up on the railing, like he was trying to catch the last quiet breath before the day kicked in. When Mary stepped up onto the porch, he barely raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Rose," he said, setting his cup down, "something happened?" Mary stood straight, but her hands were clenched into fists. She was shaking, though she tried to hide it. "Tommy's gone. They took him. I know it was Grady's men. His tracks stop at the trail, and one of your boys saw a black horse with a white patch." The sheriff went quiet. His face grew serious, but his voice stayed calm. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I need someone to ride out. We still have time." He looked at her a long moment, weighing something. Then he stood up, took off his hat, and ran a hand through his gray hair. "Mary, I'm real sorry." "I am. But you know what it means to ride into Grady's camp. That man doesn't run a gang, he runs a militia. 3 of us wouldn't stand a chance. And I don't have more than that. One's laid up wounded, 2 are out past the ridge, and the rest, they ain't going near that place." Mary stepped closer. "He's my son. He's 10. You want me to just sit here while they—" The sheriff held up a hand. "That's not what I'm saying. Just be smart. Maybe if we raise the ransom, stall for time. Grady knows a boy's worth something." "I don't have that kind of money," Mary said quietly. "And you know it." Judson looked away, down the road, then said, "I'll ask around. See if anyone saw where they went. I'll do what I can, but I can't ride out there myself." "I'm sorry." Mary didn't speak. She just nodded once, turned, and walked away. Slow, steady, never letting him see how hollow it felt inside. She understood now. There was no one else. She was on her own. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky a pale, washed-out orange. Mary sat by the window, her shoulder pressed against the wooden frame. The house was quiet, too quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, no rustling from Tommy. Just the wind chasing dust across the porch. On the kitchen table sat the bucket he was supposed to bring back full. Next to it, his tin cup. Everything in the room looked like he might walk in any second. But he didn't. Out the window, she could see the river. And beyond that, a hill. And at the foot of that hill, a small blackened cabin. Weather-worn and forgotten. That's where Jed Collins lived. Folks didn't talk about him much. And if they did, it was in whispers. Earlier that day, on her way back from the sheriff's, someone passing by had mumbled, "If anyone can pull a soul out of Grady's hands, it's him. Old Jed knows trails even the coyotes won't touch." She hadn't answered, but the words had stuck. And now, they echoed louder than the wind. People said he used to be a tracker, one of the best. Then one day, he just vanished from the world. Some claimed he was a hired gun. Others said he'd lost his family. No one really knew. But everyone agreed on one thing. Jed kept to himself. Didn't wave, didn't shop in town, didn't drink at the saloon. He just existed. Alone. Mary stared toward the trees, where his cabin was hidden in shadow. And deep inside her, something stirred. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was hope. Mary walked the narrow, overgrown trail toward Jed's cabin. The morning was still, with barely a breeze. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried out. Twigs snapped under her boots, and dry grass tugged at her skirt. But she didn't stop. Every step felt heavy, not from the walk, but from the fear of what she was about to ask. Jed Collins lived alone across the river. Never let anyone get close. They said he used to be a bounty hunter. Could track a man by a bent blade of grass, the smell of ash, a print in the dust. Then, about 6 years back, he just disappeared. Built a cabin beyond the hills and stopped talking to folks. You'd see him in town once in a while, grabbing flour, salt, bullets, but he never made eye contact. Never stayed long. Just took what he needed and vanished again. Mary knew all this, but she had no other road left to walk. By the time she reached his door, her heart was pounding so loud, she was sure he'd hear it through the wood. She knocked. Lightly at first, then harder. No answer. "Jed?" Her voice was steadier than she expected. "It's Mary Rose. I need your help." Silence. Then, somewhere deep inside, the creak of an old floorboard. "It's important. It's about my son." Still nothing. She waited, then knocked again, louder this time. After a few more seconds, the door slowly creaked open. There he was. Tall, broad-shouldered. His hair was graying at the temples, his beard rough and untrimmed. His face sun-worn, weathered like old pine. His eyes were dark and tired, like they'd seen too much. Not cruel, just distant. He didn't say a word, just looked at her. "They took my son," she said, not breaking eye contact. "Tommy. He's 10. Yesterday morning, he went to fetch water. One of Grady's men took him. Someone saw it. I found the tracks. I know which way they went. Still, he said nothing. I went to the sheriff. He won't go. No one will. I'm on my own. But you, she took a breath. People say you used to find folks. They say you were the best. She stopped talking. Her chest was tight. Jed finally exhaled and spoke, his voice low and rough. I don't find people anymore, he said. I don't pull them out. I don't shoot. Why? He stared at her a long moment, then said quietly, because I've already lost too much, and I'm done losing. He stepped back and started to close the door. Mary moved forward, placed her hand gently on the frame. He's just a child, Jed. I know. You could. I can't, he said, cutting her off. Not angry. Just final. She let go of the door. He shut it softly. No slam. Just closed. Mary stood there for another minute, then turned and walked back down the path the way she came. The sun had climbed a little higher, but she didn't notice. It felt like the hope she'd carried all the way up that trail was still lying there on his doorstep. Night had settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Crickets sang outside, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called through the dark. Inside, by the hearth, the fire flickered low, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. Jed sat forward on a worn chair, elbows resting on his knees, holding an old, time-yellowed photograph. In it, a young woman with a gentle smile, and a little girl, maybe 6, her hair tied into 2 tight braids. His wife. His daughter. All that was left. The photo was creased and worn thin, its edges torn. He stared at it like he was trying to hear their voices again. But all he could hear was silence. The same silence that had filled his world the day he came home to an empty house. A raid. Just another day, then dust on the horizon, gunshots, screams. By the time he got there, it was over. The cabin burned. They found his wife and daughter later, down in the ravine behind the hill. He hadn't spoken of it since. Not to anyone. He just walked away from it all. From people. From the world. Because the only thing the world had ever given him was pain. His thumb brushed gently over his daughter's face on the photo. Something flickered in his eyes. No tears. No cries. Just a shadow, deep and quiet, like a wound that never really heals. Near the door, his old knife rested in its scuffed sheath. He picked it up, turned it slowly in his hands. Heavy. Wooden handle. Once, that knife had saved his life. Later, it took the meaning out of it. Jed rose slowly and walked to the door. There was a nail in the frame where a coat used to hang. He hung the knife there. Then he looked one last time at the photograph, pressed it to his chest, and gently tucked it into his pocket. He didn't speak. Just sat back down by the fire. Watched the coals burn down to ash. And in his eyes, in the stillness of that cabin, something sparked. Not tears. Not sorrow. Anger. Pain. And maybe, for the first time in years, resolve. The morning broke gray and uncertain. Like it couldn't decide if it was the start of something new, or just another day of the same quiet hopelessness. Low fog clung to the ground. The grass was soaked, as if the night still hadn't let go. Mary stood by the well, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. She wasn't drinking it, just holding it, so her fingers wouldn't shake. Her eyes were hollow from a sleepless night. She'd spent it sitting by the window, staring into the dark, waiting for some sign. A shape, a shadow, anything that might mean hope. But morning came like the night had never ended. Inside, on the kitchen table, lay a crumpled, mud-stained scrap of paper. Someone had slipped it under her door during the night. Just a few rushed, jagged words. $500. Old Oak past the river. 3 days. Alone. No gun. Or say goodbye to the boy. She must have read those lines a dozen times. She had no idea where to find that kind of money. And she didn't believe for a second they'd let Tommy go, even if she did. She was about to head inside when something moved, a shape, cutting through the fog down by the river trail. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, walking with a slow, steady gait. He wasn't rushing, but every step looked like one already chosen. It was Jed, rifle slung over his shoulder, an old leather bag on his back, dark shirt, worn coat, dusty boots. No horse, no words, just walking. Mary froze. Her heart gave a sharp, unfamiliar pull. She wasn't sure, was he coming to her? Or just passing through on his way to town? He didn't look around, didn't pause. He just walked straight ahead. Then, As he reached the old bridge, he lifted his head and met her eyes. No smile, no speech, just a nod. Brief, steady, like a promise. And that was enough. There were no questions in his face. No hesitation. Just purpose. Not loud or proud. Just the kind that's already been lived with and decided. Mary didn't move. Her hand lowered slowly, the coffee forgotten. She watched him cross the bridge and disappear into the trees. And for the first time in all these days, something shifted inside her. Not relief, not joy, but not despair either. He was going. For her son. For the boy no one else would fight for. And in that quiet morning, where no words were spoken, there was more truth than in anything the sheriff had said. Jed vanished beyond the bend. But Mary stood there for a long time, staring into the trees, afraid to blink, afraid it might all disappear. Jed moved like a tracker born to it. Steady, unhurried, but watching everything. Every step mattered. Every choice cost time. And time was something that little boy didn't have much of. The trail he followed was old, long forgotten. Miners used it once, before folks started disappearing up this way. Now, most stayed clear, which only made Jed more certain. This was the kind of place they'd pick. Remote, covered, caves and ruins hidden deep in the rock. He followed the dry bed of an old creek until he spotted something pressed into the dirt. A horseshoe print, worn thin, heavy set. Jed crouched and touched it with his fingers. Left hind, big horse, carrying weight. He muttered to himself. Nearby, faint, almost lost, were small barefoot tracks. A boy's. They followed the horse for a while, then vanished. Either they pulled him up into the saddle, or slung him across like cargo. Jed stood up slowly, eyes narrowed. The trail turned uphill, steep, overgrown. Most folks wouldn't have seen it. But he did. An old prospector's path. Tight switchbacks, plenty of cover. He left the main trail and started up. Every footfall measured. Every open space avoided. His fingers rested on his rifle. Not from fear. Just the old habit of someone who's walked into trouble before. A bird shrieked somewhere up ahead. Sudden, sharp. Spooked. Jed froze. Listened. Nothing. Another 30 minutes passed. And then, signs. A patch of fresh ash. And beside it, a cigarette butt crushed under a heel. Jed picked it up, smelled it. Fresh. Maybe an hour, 2 at most. Nearby, a snapped branch, flattened grass. They'd stopped here. Sloppy. Too relaxed for men in hiding. They didn't think anyone was following. He kept climbing. Past 2 boulders and through a narrow gap in the rocks. Jed stepped out onto a rise and looked down into a narrow ravine. Below, smoke curling from a dying fire. 2 horses tied to twisted tree roots. 3 men sat near the flames. One laughing. One sharpening a knife. The third just staring into the coals. Jed pulled out his spyglass. And there, deeper in the shadows, he saw a small figure curled near the wall. Head down, hands behind his back. Tommy. Alive. Jed lowered the glass, closed his eyes for a breath, then exhaled slowly. He knew what came next. And there was no turning back. The old mine stank of rot and wet stone. It was the kind of place that felt abandoned by time. Walls crumbled at the edges. The air hung thick, like even the rocks had grown tired of holding on. Somewhere deep, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. Tommy sat near the back, curled up on a pile of moldy old sacks. Barefoot, one sleeve torn. His eyes caught the faint light. But not from tears. He was scared, sure, but he wasn't crying. He knew his mama was out there, waiting, and he had to hold on. His hands were tied behind him, but not tight. He tried working the knot loose earlier, but it made too much noise. Now, he just listened. To footsteps overhead. To the dogs barking. To the men arguing. One of them came down the shaft. Thick stubble on his face, a scar curling down his neck. He carried a lantern, casting wild shadows on the damp walls. Well, little hero. He sneered, voice low and mean. City's looking for you now, huh? Or maybe your mama's just given up. Tommy didn't answer. Just stared back, jaw clenched tight. The man stepped closer. You sit tight, pup, he growled. "You're here till your dear mother brings us what we asked for. And if she doesn't, Grady's done playing nice. He ain't no babysitter." He turned and climbed back up, muttering under his breath about stubborn women and their damn pride. Above, near the fire, Isaac Grady lit a cigar. Tall, white shirt smeared with soot, eyes like cold steel. He sat with one leg crossed, gazing toward the mine entrance. "Calm as ever." "You think she'll come through?" one of the others asked. Grady didn't answer right away. Took a drag, blew smoke into the flames. "If she don't," he said slowly, "the boy won't make it to Sunday. I don't need dead weight. What if someone comes looking?" He smirked. "Who?" "That sheriff." He snorted. "That coward won't lift a finger. And the townsfolk? They won't even spit in our direction." He stood, flicked the cigar into the fire. "And if someone's fool enough to try, well, let them. Wouldn't be the first time." The forest was growing quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that crawls in when something's wrong. Jed had heard it before. When birds go silent. When even the wind holds its breath. That's when you know someone's waiting. He dropped to one knee behind a fallen log. The soil beneath was soft, freshly stirred. Boot prints. Still sharp. Not more than an hour old. They led forward, then cut hard right into the brush. Jed holstered the rifle across his back and drew his revolver. He moved ahead slow, crouched, weaving between the trees like smoke. Quiet, controlled. Even the deer wouldn't hear him. But someone else did first. A shout tore through the undergrowth. Young, shaky, a boy burst out of the shrubs, hands trembling around a rifle. The shot went wide, splintering bark inches from Jed's shoulder. Jed lunged, fast and clean out. A hard blow with the butt of his gun drove the breath from the boy's lungs. He hit the ground gasping, eyes wide, weapon forgotten. No time to rest. Another sound, left side. He turned. Older man, Colt drawn, steady hands, hunter's eyes. "Don't move," he barked. Jed dived behind a thick trunk. A bullet whined past. Then Jed rolled, came out low. Fired once. Hit clean. Shoulder shot. The man held and staggered back, gun clattering to the ground, as he stumbled downhill, leaving a red trail through the ferns. Jed turned back to the boy, still curled, wheezing. "Where are they?" Jed asked, firm, but not angry. I'm just on watch. I swear. I don't know what's going on in the camp. Isaac runs it all. We just guard the trail." "Where is it?" "Down below, past the ridge. There's an old mine cut into the rock. The kid's in there. Real quiet, real still. I fed him once. I swear he's alive." Jed looked him over. Young. Scared. One of those lost kids who end up with a gang. For the price of a hot meal and a name. Not a killer. Not yet. If you so much as whisper where I went. Next time, I don't miss." Jed said calmly. The kid nodded, lips pressed tight. Jed stood and moved on. Faster now. He could feel it. The camp was close. And somewhere down there, in the dark of that mine, was a boy. And if Jed didn't make it in time, by morning, he might already be gone. The clock was ticking now. The town was waking slow. Shops creaked open, dogs barked, folks went about their day. Everything looked the same, as if nothing had happened, as if there wasn't a scared boy up in the hills, who might still have a future. Or maybe none at all. Mary walked the dusty street, a small cloth pouch clenched in her hand. Inside, everything she had. A few coins, a few crumpled bills, not even half of what they were asking. But still, she kept walking, door to door. The general store, the apothecary, neighbors she'd shared harvests and heartbreaks with for years. Sorry, Mary, barely enough to get through winter ourselves. If it were just a few dollars, maybe, but 500? You know who you're dealing with. Grady doesn't play games. If you're smart, you'll leave town while you still can. She listened, didn't cry, didn't argue, just nodded, and moved on. By midday, her legs were trembling. Her last hope? The church. A small wooden chapel on the edge of town. Always quiet there. She stepped inside. Empty pews. Dust in the light. That old sin of wax and worn-out wood. A single oil lamp flickered weakly on the altar. Mary knelt, pulled the shawl from her shoulders, closed her eyes. No words came, only thoughts. God, I'm not asking for gold, not asking for a miracle. Just let my boy breathe. Let him live. If Jed finds him, give him strength. And me, just give me enough to wait, even if it takes forever. The sun was sinking low, spilling rust and copper across the hills. Jed moved along the steep trail, stepping over dry roots and jagged stone. Wind whispered past, stirring dust and old leaves. But otherwise, the world was quiet. Too quiet. Then he saw a man up ahead near a small herd of goats. Thin, bent with age, wearing a battered felt hat and a sun-bleached coat, a crooked stick in one hand. A shepherd. Jed knew men like this. They saw everything and never said more than needed. He climbed up slow. The old man turned and studied him, squinting into the light, then gave a quiet nod. You seen riders today? Jed asked. The old man nodded back. 4 of them. Early morning. One had a boy slung sideways on the saddle. Kid looked out of it. Might have been asleep, might have been worse. Eyes were gone, like he wasn't all there. Which way? The shepherd raised his stick, pointing northeast, toward a narrow gap where the cliffs pressed together. Old mine up there. Been shut down since the war. Folks say it's full of coyotes now, though even they don't stick around long. Why? Because even the bears don't go near that place, the man said. Flat. Bad ground. Swallows men whole. They say the rock's cursed, unstable. One bad sound, and she could come down on your head. Jed gave a single nod. Appreciate it. He turned to leave, but the old man called out behind him. Hey, son. You headin' up there alone? You better not go in blind. Those boys ain't just outlaws. They shoot first. Jed didn't stop walking, just said over his shoulder. So do I. Then he disappeared into the narrowing pass, and the wind came back, howling softly through the cut in the stone. The mountain night was darker than most, like the earth itself was trying to hide whatever was happening near the old mine. No stars. The moon lost behind clouds. Only the flicker of a campfire lit the rocks near the entrance. Jed lay flat on the slope, face pressed into the dirt, eyes locked on the firelight below. He'd been watching for over an hour. One sentry made lazy rounds, moving like a man with nothing to fear. The others sat near the flames, eating, joking, tossing scraps into the fire. One hummed a tune. The other laced up his boot. They were relaxed. Too relaxed. They never thought anyone would come this close, especially not him. When the sentry disappeared around a bend, Jed moved, slow, like a shadow. He slipped between rocks and brush, his every step placed with care. He knew the sound a dry twig could make under the wrong foot. He knew it could cost a life. He crept to the north side of the mina, to where the old vent shaft was still half open. Miners used it once, long ago. Now it was narrow, half blocked with rubble, but just wide enough. Jed slid in on his belly. His coat snagged a nail. He tore it free with a quiet rip. The air inside was damp and thick with the smell of rot and rock. Even his breath sounded loud. He stopped, listened. Water dripping, and somewhere ahead a ragged, uneven breath. He crawled forward, hands searching the walls, feet pushing inch by inch. Then, a faint light. Not firelight, but the dull yellow of a lantern hanging from a splintered beam. Below it, a boy. Tommy sat curled in the dirt, knees pulled tight to his chest, hands tied behind him. His clothes were dirty and torn, hair matted, face pale, eyes dull and far away. Not asleep, not awake, just lost. Jed stayed in the shadows, then slowly stepped into the edge of the light. Tommy, he whispered. The boy flinched. His eyes widened. He opened his mouth to scream. Jed held up a finger. Shoo. It's all right. Your mama sent me. I'm here to take you home. Tommy stared at him, trying to make sense of the voice, the face, wondering if this was real. Are you? Jed? Jed nodded. We're getting out. But you gotta stay quiet, son. Real quiet. Understand? Tommy nodded back. His chin trembled, but he held it together. No tears, just shaking hands. Jed took out his knife and carefully cut the ropes. The boy rubbed his wrists, breathed fast, but said nothing. Jed pulled him close. You think you can crawl? Yeah, Tommy croaked. Jed led the way back through the shaft. Tommy right behind. Above them, laughter rose from the camp. Someone tossed a tin into the fire. No one noticed. Not yet. When they reached the outside, Jed crouched, put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Just a little more. Fast and quiet, all right? Tommy nodded again. This time steadier. Stronger. Jed looked at him and thought, this kid's got more grit than most men I've ever known. They'd only just started down the back trail when a shout rang out behind them, sharp and loud. Then another. Then a gunshot, fired high into the air. Hey, he's gone. The kid's gone. Jed grabbed Tommy's hand. Run, he said, low and steady. They bolted. Through brush, over rocks, leaping roots and ducking branches. The narrow trail twisted down into a ravine, lined with scrub pine and dry bush. Cold air rose from below, but behind them came shouts and the heavy drum of boots on stone. There, down there. Another shot. A bullet struck a rock near Jed's head. Stone fragments stung his cheek. Tommy flinched, but didn't scream. Jed shoved him forward. Don't look back. Go left, down to the gully. They dove into a split between boulders, slid down a dry wash where water once ran. But one of the men was faster than they thought. He came out from a side path. Tall, broad, with a bloody bandage on his shoulder. The same one Jed had shot in the forest. This time, he had a knife. He lunged. Jed shoved Tommy aside and took the hit head on. They crashed to the ground, rocks hammering into his back, dust clouding the air. The knife missed, but a fist caught his jaw. Jed hit back. Twice. Then again. The man cursed, tried to press him down. Tommy crouched nearby, eyes wide, frozen with fear. Jed twisted the man's wrist, threw him sideways, drove him hard into the dirt. He grabbed him by the collar, slammed the butt of his revolver into the man's temple. The body went limp, but not before the knife had caught him. A hot flash across his ribs, slicing the skin under his shirt. It burned like fire, but it wasn't deep. Jed rolled off him, hand clamped to his side. Tommy rushed over. You okay? Help me up. The boy got under his arm, bracing him as Jed groaned to his feet. We gotta move, he rasped. More shouts echoed behind them. Another shot, closer this time. The chase had begun. Down the rocks, along the wash, Jed said. Don't stop, even if you're scared. You keep going. Got it. Tommy nodded, eyes bright with fear, but steady. Jed gritted his teeth, checked his revolver, and the two of them vanished into the shadow of the ravine. The first streaks of dawn were breaking in the east. When the dusty road to town finally came into view over the hill, Jed walked with a limp, leaning hard on the boy beside him. Tommy was worn out, covered in dirt and scratches. But he didn't complain, not once. His face was set, tough and silent, like a man who'd seen fear too early and learned to keep walking anyway. At the ranch gate, Mary was already there. She hadn't slept, hadn't sat down, when she heard the dogs bark and saw two figures in the distance. She ran, barefoot, not bothering with a shawl or shoes. Her heart pounded so loud, she could feel it in her ears. Tommy, she cried, breathless. The boy pulled away from Jed and ran, arms out, legs stumbling on tired feet. Ma, they met in the middle, arms around each other in a crashing hug. She dropped to her knees, clutched him tight against her chest, kissing his hair, his cheeks, running trembling hands over his arms and face, making sure he was really there, still breathing, still hers. Tommy tried to speak, but she barely heard him. She just kept whispering, "Thank God, thank God." When she finally looked up, Jed was still standing a few paces away. His shirt was torn, his side wrapped in a bloodied rag, face pale, eyes heavy. He was on his feet, but just barely. Mary rose slowly, walked to him without a word, and wrapped her arms around him, tight, without hesitation. No speeches, no questions. She laid her cheek against his chest, like someone who couldn't hold back anymore. Jed didn't speak, didn't move. He just lowered his chin onto her head, closed his eyes. Not from pain this time, but from something else. Relief. Maybe peace. Maybe both. The next morning, just as the town was waking up, a rider approached Mary's house at a slow, steady pace. It was Sheriff Judson. He dismounted with a grunt, adjusted his hat, and walked straight up onto the porch without waiting for an invite. Jed was there, sitting in a chair by the wall, wrapped in an old blanket, his side bandaged. He saw the sheriff out of the corner of his eye, but didn't move. Mary stepped out behind him, stood a few feet away, watching in silence. The sheriff pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat, smoothed it out carefully, and handed it to Jed. "Pardon," he said simply. "Official. Wipes the slate clean. Signed by the circuit judge. I sent a rider out last night soon as I heard you made it back." Jed took the paper, gave it a glance. Didn't read it out loud. Didn't figure this town to ever remember who I was. Judson let out a slow breath. "This town remembers plenty, Jed. Thing is, until yesterday, you were just a ghost. But now? Now you've done more than the rest of us ever had the guts to try. And hell, if that ain't reason enough to set things right, then I don't know what is." They locked eyes. No speeches. No ceremony. Just quiet respect, man to man. The sheriff gave a small nod, turned, and headed back toward his horse. Before mounting, he paused, looked over his shoulder. "Rest up," he said. "You earned it." Then he rode off, leaving behind only hoofbeats, a porch bathed in soft morning light, and the kind of silence that finally felt peaceful, safe. A few days had passed. The town had slipped back into its usual rhythm. Shop bells ringing, wagons creaking, dogs barking behind fences. But inside Mary's home, things were different now. The quiet no longer held fear, just peace and purpose. Mornings started early. Jed was out by the leaning fence, hammer in hand. The sun was just rising, glinting off nail heads. He wore a rolled-up work shirt, his side still bandaged, but he moved steady, without pain. Each strike of the hammer was measured, calm, not chasing time, but mending it. Tommy stood beside him, a handful of nails in his small fist, passing them one by one. "This one work?" he'd ask. "Yep," Jed would say. Sometimes they were quiet. Sometimes they talked. About the fence, about the trees, or the chicken that darted by with a stick in its beak, like it had a mission. In those few words, there was more connection than in hours of conversation. Mary stepped out with a mug of tea. She walked slowly, watching them with a quiet smile. She handed the mug to Jed. He took it, gave a small nod, and held her gaze a moment longer than usual. "Careful. It's hot," she said gently. He took a sip, closed his eyes. "That's real," he said. Tommy smirked and turned back to the fence. Jed paused for a second, looking out across the ranch, the sky, the woman, the boy, and he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Jed Collins had never been the type to stay in one place his whole life. He kept moving, not because he wanted to, but because he believed he had to. He'd lost everything that made him feel human, and when he disappeared into the hills, it wasn't escape. It was a farewell. But after everything, after pulling that boy from the dark, after Mary welcomed him in without a word, after the town stopped whispering and simply let him be, he realized something hadn't been lost. Not all of it. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was breathing. Not alone. Not in the shadows of what he'd lost, but beside two people who gave him a reason to stay. He didn't stay because he had nowhere else to go. He stayed because, for the first time in a long, long while, he finally had somewhere to return to. The sky above the plains was on fire with the colors of sunset. The edges of the clouds were lit in orange and rose, like someone had spilled warmth across the edge of the world. The air was still, quiet, filled only with the chirp of distant crickets and the soft creak of old porch boards. 3 people sat on the porch. Mary, wrapped in a shawl, leaned gently against the railing. Tommy was curled up near her feet, sleep heavy on his face, but stubbornly refusing to go inside. And Jed sat in the chair beside them, arms folded across his chest, wearing an expression so rare on his face. Peace. It had been years since he'd felt anything close to it. I had a family once too, he said suddenly, voice low, eyes fixed on the horizon. A wife. A daughter. She was 6. We lived down by the river. Back then, I was needed too. Until the day I wasn't there in time. Mary didn't speak. She just turned slightly, listening with her whole being. They were killed. He continued. Bandits. Just passing through. I was out on a job. Got back when it was already over. After that, I stopped going anywhere. Stopped being part of anything. Just kept moving away from everything. He let out a breath. Like something heavy finally slipped off his back. I thought I had nothing left to lose. Turns out, maybe something was still waiting to be found. Mary looked at him softly, steadily. Tommy smiled in his sleep. The sun kept sinking, slow and quiet. Jed turned to her. There were no tears in his eyes. Just silence. And in that silence, acceptance. Simple. Human. If this story of courage, love, and redemption touched you, go ahead and give it a like and hit that subscribe button here on this channel. You'll always find heartfelt stories from the Old West, where honor still matters. Family comes first. And sometimes, the good guys really do win. Thanks for riding along with me today. I'll see you in the next story.